The Desert Whisper Motel shimmered into view through waves of scorching heat. Calling it a shimmer implied something alluring, but nothing about the low, sun-bleached building squatting 30 miles from civilization held any appeal. The neon sign, barely flickering vacancy and washed-out rows, had been dark for at least 10 years, yet it still fought the afternoon glare. I eased my battered pickup onto the gravel, the dying engine coughing louder than the endless desert hush. 3 weeks earlier, I had been Leon Hayes, Reno bartender with a decent apartment and a credit score that pretended I understood finance. Now I was simply Leon driving a truck kept alive by corrosion and hope, carrying $340 in cash and a gambling debt with very sharp teeth, the sort that sent men to your doorstep with crowbars and patient grins, the sort that made absolute nowhere seem like a brilliant relocation plan. The office door resisted, warped by decades of brutal temperature swings. Inside, the air was fractionally cooler, thick with stale carpet, and a metallic bite like ozone after lightning strikes glass. A woman in her 60s sat behind the counter, steel gray hair yanked into a severe bun, eyes that had stared too long into too many hard truths. Looking for help? Her voice scraped like a lifelong pack-a-day habit, though no cigarettes were in sight. Saw the sign. "You hiring?" She examined me with an intensity that made my spine tighten. "Cash only. No paperwork, no taxes, no past. You fleeing something?" "Who isn't?" One corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Maggie Holt. I own the place. Midnight to 8. Check-ins, minor repairs, obey the rules. $700 a week paid Fridays. You sleep in the back room." She paused. "You got an issue with rules?" "Depends what they are." She slid a laminated sheet across the counter. 7 lines in faded typewriter font, numbered but unexplained. I read them twice. Ice settled in my gut. "These are oddly specific," I said. "They're absolute." Maggie's tone allowed no negotiation. "Follow them precisely every night. No shortcuts, no clever ideas. 3 people in the past year thought they were smarter. They didn't last." The rules sounded like paranoid delirium, propping interior doors at 2 a.m. A returning knocks to an empty room. A permanent guest in room 12 who never showed his face. Sand that must never be discarded. Yet Maggie recited them with the flat certainty of someone reading a grocery list. I should have left. Should have climbed back into the truck and driven until the tank or luck ran dry. But 700 cash weekly, no trail, no questions. That was oxygen. And the Desert Whisper, whatever horrors it cradled, sat in the kind of emptiness that made men like me disappear. When do I start? Tonight. The first night I almost convinced myself the rules were Maggie's coping mechanism. Old desert hermit filling silence with elaborate ritual. The motel formed an L around the lot, 12 rooms staring inward. Only 3 showed cars that night. Room 3, Room 7, Room 9. The rest stood blind and locked against the night. At 1:45 a.m. I began with the doors, interior doors only. Office closet, tiny bathroom, my new sleeping cubicle. I wedged each open with the rubber stops she'd left, feeling absurd. The building was silent except for wheezing AC units. At exactly 2 a.m., the air pressure changed. My ears popped like on a descending plane. Then came the vibration, deep, sub-audible, rising from the foundation. The structure exhaled, a slow sigh of stressed timber and concrete. The open doors turned into lungs, channeling something nameless from room to room. I stood rigid behind the counter, every instinct howling that buildings do not breathe. But the sensation wasn't hostile. It was deliberate, like watching a massive organism inhale and release. By 2:15, it ceased. Pressure equalized. I closed the doors with trembling fingers. At 3:17 a.m., the parking lot visitor appeared. On the ancient monochrome monitor, a human silhouette glided from the darkness beside room 11, stopped in the center of the frame, and faced the office. Rule 5 burned in my mind. Between 3 and 4 years, never look directly. Acknowledge only in peripheral vision. I kept my gaze on paperwork, watching the figure from the edge of sight. It remained motionless for 3 full minutes, then slid back into shadow. When I finally stared straight, the asphalt was empty, except for a fresh dusting of sand where none had been an hour earlier. The knocking arrived on my 3rd night. I had settled into the rhythm, doors propped, building exhaling, sweeping the strange sand that always migrated toward the exit like it longed for home, keeping the old radio locked on AM 640's pure white noise hiss because Rule 6 forbade changing it. At 12:43 a.m., 3 sharp metallic raps echoed from room 9. Empty, according to the ledger. I waited the prescribed 7 minutes while my pulse hammered. At minute 7, I walked over. The door looked ordinary. Peeling paint, tarnished numerals. I knocked 3 times, matching the cadence. Silence, thick and expectant. Then a long, slow exhale, as though someone trapped for decades had finally been granted air. I swept a line of sand away from the threshold on my return. Days melted into uneasy routine. Maggie appeared each afternoon near 4 with supplies and cash, never asking how the nights went, only, "Any trouble?" I always answered no, and relief softened her eyes. I learned not to stare at room 12. Its do not disturb sign never moved. On Fridays, an envelope containing exactly $800 in crisp bills smelling faintly of ozone appeared under the office door. Payment from the invisible tenant. I learned the static on AM 640 had texture. Usually smooth hiss, but sometimes it crackled, almost forming cadence. Rule 6 said if the quality changed, step outside immediately. It hadn't. Yet. I learned the sand behaved with intention, appearing in deliberate places, always yearning toward the desert. Sweeping it outward felt like guiding something home. By week 2, I stopped asking why. The rules weren't madness. They were maintenance. A delicate balance keeping whatever lived here asleep. Then Dr. Eris Thorne arrived, and the balance cracked. He rolled in at 11:30 p.m. Tuesday in a rental sedan bearing bland government plates. He unloaded 2 heavy equipment cases and a battered leather satchel. Mid-50s, graying temples, the comfortable disarray of someone who'd stopped caring about mirrors long ago. "Reservation under Thorne," he said, voice precise, faintly accented by academia more than birthplace. Room 9, 3 nights. Maggie had booked it herself, unusual. He scanned the layout with calculating eyes. "Quiet, I trust. I'll be conducting delicate recordings." I handed over the key. One case read electromagnetic field analyzer. The other bore symbols familiar from late-night forums. Ghost hunter? I tried for casual. Folklorist. Historian of places memory abandons. He leaned closer. Any unusual seismic activity? Minor tremors? Rhythmic vibrations? My throat dried. Old building. Things settle. Indeed they do. He studied my face. "Good night, Leon." I hadn't given my name. At 2 a.m., the exhale came stronger, agitated. At 2:47, the knocking. 3 metallic raps from occupied room 9. Rule 2 offered no contingency for living guests. I waited the 7 minutes, heart slamming, then knocked back. Footsteps. Thorne opened the door wearing headphones wired to blinking consoles, blue light pulsing under the doorframe. "Yes? Sorry. Thought I heard something." Making rounds. At 2:54, exactly 7 minutes after my meters spiked. His eyes narrowed. Very precise knocking. "Standard procedure? Just checking locks." I retreated. Behind me, a new line of sand had appeared across his threshold. Morning brought Thorne to the office with 2 thermoses. He looked like a man who'd solved a theorem in blood. "Coffee. You appear to need it." He opened a notebook dense with graphs. That 3-knock pattern triggered a massive response. "How long have you worked here?" "Couple weeks." "And noticed patterns? Timed anomalies?" He flipped pages. "This site displays traits of what I term a psychic sink, where collective trauma lingers measurably. Last night between 2 and 4 a.m., I recorded rhythmic EMF waves, inhalation and exhalation. Something here is conscious and attempting dialogue." Before I could lie convincingly, Maggie's truck crunched gravel outside. By mid-afternoon, reality unraveled. The retirees in room 7 woke from a nap to find their bed buried under inches of damp sand despite sealed windows. The mineral reek clung to the air like pre-storm ozone. When I arrived with apologies and broom, the sand had vanished, sheets pristine, yet the dampness remained. At 3:00 p.m., the radio shifted from hiss to structured clicks, knocking in code. I fled outside per Rule 6 while my shirt glued itself to my skin with sweat. 5 minutes later, the rhythm stopped. Thorne stood by the radio holding his phone. Pattern interference, identical to someone signaling through a barrier. At 4, the elderly man from room 3 drifted in, eyes unfocused. "Strange dreams, son. This spot, there was mining here long ago, wasn't there? Collapse. 43 men, I hear them begging." Rule 7 flared like neon. "Deny everything." "Just dessert, sir. Easy to confuse old Nevada stories." He left troubled. I felt like a traitor. That night, the manifestations escalated beyond containment. Sand piled ankle-deep in corridors. Knocking cascaded around the building like a wave. At 2 a.m., The exhale became a roar. Wind from nowhere carried tomb smell and pressure that hurt my ears. The radio screamed with 43 layered voices crying the same word. Remember. Guests fled into the lot, faces bleached by moonlight and terror. Thorne emerged, clutching a corroded brass tag, eyes blazing. "It isn't a haunting," he whispered. "It's a prisoner asking for its name back." Dawn painted the sky bruised purple. Cars vanished from the lot. Maggie arrived looking 70 instead of 60. Thorne spread documents across her hood, payroll ledgers, photographs, a hand-drawn map. All 43 identified. My grandfather was foreman the day the shaft was sealed. He kept the truth. These men were erased. This motel was built atop their grave to keep the silence. Maggie's hands shook. My grandmother built it to keep the cage. Room 12's lock turned with a funereal click. Inside, walls painted with 43 names, a low altar holding 43 river stones, incense curling like constant prayer. Original photographs watched from the sill and shelf. "She didn't hide the disaster," Maggie said, voice cracking. "She contained what the forgetting created. 43 dying minds fused into one grieving consciousness. The rules were ritual care. Breath, response, gentle return of their substance. Never enough acknowledgement to wake it fully. Never so little it raged." Thorne stared in awe. "A psychic pressure valve. Brilliant and cruel. Desperate," Maggie corrected. "The rules collapsed through the morning. Sand poured faster than I could sweep. Doors refused to stay propped. The radio screamed indoors and out. At 2 p.m., wad exhausted beyond reason, I broke Rule 4, shoveled sand into a trash can like common dirt. The building screamed. Sand detonated from every surface, rising like a tide. In minutes, the lobby became a grain-filled coffin. A wall of sand sealed the hallway, trapping Maggie's cry behind it. Thorne shouted over the roar, "Give it what it wants, now!" We had seconds. He began reading names while I scrawled them into the guest ledger, official record, ink and paper making them real again. With each spoken name, a translucent figure coalesced. Listening, the sand halted its rise, began to recede, forming 43 distinct men around us, work clothes, helmets, faces etched with 70 years of waiting. When the final name, John Samuel Reeves, was read and written, the youngest stepped forward, smiled with impossible gratitude, and the figures turned to light. They walked with us to room 12. One by one, Thorne told their full stories, wives, children, dreams, while each touched their stone and dissolved at last into peace instead of torment. Silence fell. True silence, the kind that follows absolution. Months later, the Desert Whisper became a memorial. Room 12 remained the shrine. The others housed photographs, artifacts, truth. Descendants came. Officials came. The 43 names were carved into history where no corporation could erase them again. Some nights, the desert wind still lifts the sand into 43 brief silhouettes that stand in quiet circle, then settle back into the earth. Content, remembered, finally free. I lock up at 8 now. No more midnight shifts, no more rules. Just stories that refuse to stay buried, and the soft certainty that some debts are paid not with money, but with memory. As I drive away under star-drunk sky, the wind sometimes shapes a gentle wave across the lot, 43 hands raised in farewell. I lift mine in return, smile and keep driving, carrying their names with me like a promise kept.